Content warning. The following is a series of videos about the enemy of the Garou, the Wyrm. The cosmic entity representing all things bad, 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 and worse, the very force of corruption itself. Now, I won't dwell on unsavory descriptions, but I will have to reference things like abuse, violence, death, self-harm, and severe mental issues, to name just a few. So, viewer discretion is advised. So last time we spoke about how the Wyrm was attacked by the Weaver, trapped inside the fabric of reality itself, and was trying to get out. This episode, we're going to expand on that quite a bit. While the imagery of being trapped in the webs might be horrifying in its own right, it doesn't do enough to understand what the Wyrm actually went through, which is key to understanding how it operates. Forget the webs for a minute. Remember that all things happening on such a cosmic scale can only be described by us in imagery we can comprehend. A sentence such as trapped in a web is a convenient shortcut to describe what cannot be understood. The fabric of reality is, in fact, no more a web than the Weaver is a spider. She precedes the very concept of spiders by, say, a few billion eons. But she weaves things into shape, so it's the form we gave her. By extension, it is now how we perceive the strands of the gauntlet and the many spirits that tend to it. But pattern spiders aren't spiders either. That's just how we interpret them. So when you imagine the Weaver trapping the Wyrm in her webs, understand that to be a far, far more comfortable imagery than the reality of it. He isn't just a timeless being stuck in a soft silk while waiting for a friend to cool down and bail him out. He was cast into a net with such violence that it tore his body in 4 parts. Meanwhile, as the Weaver worked layer after layer after layer, his pleas for help remained unanswered. Through the endless aeons of agony, powerlessness, and the sting of betrayal, the Wyrm broke. His mind shattered. As he frenzies and fights back, he hurts himself ever more. And down, down, down he goes ever further. Anything he does is tainted by his own uncontrolled feelings and urges. Despair, fear, paranoia, hatred, to the point where all he can do now is corrupt and destroy. And yet, through it all, in his own twisted way, he is in fact still trying to stay true to his nature, to actually keep the balance, because spirits can never act against their natures. From that desire and an ungodly measure of denial, he divided his psyche into 3 new incarnations, each a dark reflection of a balanced triad. Enter the Triatic Wyrms. Beast of War, also known as the Calamity Wyrm, is a twisted reflection of the wild. It stands against anything or anyone that is structured, solid, or static. In that way, they're similar. But where the wild breeds change via endless creation, Beast of War does so with complete devastation. Wherever it goes, it leaves nothing standing, with no chance for regrowth. Beast of War infects any conflicts it can, so they inflate into violence, violence into war. It feeds anger into rage, and rage into frenzy. The Eater of Souls, or the Consuming Wyrm, is the equivalent of the Weaver. As she seeks to hold onto all things, to calcify all that exists into perfect static forms, that Eater of Souls also craves to hold all things. but with the intent to consume and devour all of it. Its influence can be felt in greed, gluttony, and jealousy. Needless to say, it is very strong in today's world of haves and have-nots, where 1% of the world hoards far more than they could ever spend, and the rest fill their timelines with dreams of quote-unquote eating the rich. The Defiler Wyrm is the most powerful and sentient of the three. It represents the worm's own view of itself. Unfortunately, right now the worm hates what it has become. Its purview is thus self-loathing and self-destruction. Its most powerful tool is seduction and temptation. It is the voice that says to keep going after far too many drinks, that says the speed limit is for losers, that says no one cares anyway. In other words, the Defiler Wyrm breaks its victims from the inside and brings them, through pain or pleasure, over the edge figuratively and also quite literally. Collectively, these are known as the Triatic Wyrms, sometimes as the Hydra's heads. All servants of the worm fall in line under one of these heads. Whether a particular servant is aware of their influence or not doesn't matter. The only exceptions are the Elemental Wyrms and their servants. Cultists of the worm believe the sheer violence of the Weaver's attack caused their unholy father's body to be torn and compressed so that flesh, blood, and far less palatable substances were separated into 4 parts. Referred to as the carnal essences, or by non-cultists as the Elemental Wyrms, think of them as incarnations, similar to the Beast of War, Eater of Souls, and Defiler Wyrm, but instead of representing its broken psyche, they represent its broken body. The Elemental Wyrms do not rule over anything other than the banes directly tied to their elements, but they do have strong occult significance for rituals, and their spiritual resonance can be felt when using Sense Wyrm around other servant creatures, but we'll get to that in the next episode. For now, let's just get familiar with the elementals, shall we? Elementals, wormish or not, do not represent concepts. They represent things that are physical. Most are very territorial entities with very simple agendas. They strive to spread their element in a physical world, to grow their territories. Worm elementals, while a tad more destructive, are no different. Now, imagine 2 perpendicular strands of the pattern web keeping apart opposite essences of the worm's body. One separates the essences which are called feverish from those that are frigid, or hot/energetic, versus cold/inert, while another separates the encrusted from the slime, or static versus fluid. The result should be 4 quadrants, each a combination of 2 essences. We have frigid and slime, fever and slime, frigid and encrusted, and fever and encrusted. In each of those quadrants is one of the 4 worm elements. First, in the frigid and slime quadrant comes the essence of toxin, or corrupted water, represented by the worm elemental Wakshi. Its physical counterparts include drugs, poisons, industrial chemicals, venom, and various bodily fluids, especially those tied to regenerative organs. For rituals, Wakshi is associated with the western cardinal direction. The elemental banes for this element are the Wakshani, found on page 448 of the W20 core book. In fact, all the elemental banes are on that page, so I won't repeat it for the other 3. Second, under fever and slime stands the essence of smog, or corrupted air, represented by the worm elemental Hoga. Its physical counterpart is all things noxious fumes, such as a car or a factory's exhaust. anything one shouldn't breathe in falls in here. Hoga is associated with the eastern cardinal direction. The elemental banes are the hoglins. Third, we have frigid and encrusted as the essence of sludge, or corrupted earth, represented by the elemental worm known as Echrog? Listen, I have no idea how to pronounce that. This one is a little out there. While it's supposed to be earth, it's said to manifest in, and I quote, open quote, all things toxic, which dissolves things to sludge, end quote. This somehow does not include acids, because those fall under toxin. It's actually most commonly tied to sewage, which is water. Anyway, Echrog, or whatever, is associated with the northern direction. The elemental banes under its command are Roglins, or something like that. The fourth and final quadrant is feverish and encrusted, the essence of balefire, or corrupted fire, whose worm elemental is called Firmus, physical representation of which is radioactivity and, of course, actual balefire, which is described as corrupted green or purple flames found deep within the earth, near nuclear waste dumps and nuclear weapon test sites. Of note, damage from balefire doesn't heal well and tend to cause battle scars. Naturally, this element is associated with the remaining direction, which is south. The firmlings are the banes you want if you want to fry your players nice and toasty. So how do you use all this? The Triatic Wyrms are better used in Cthulhu-esque storytelling. They are forces better felt than seen. Use them in half-heard whispers, written in strange dark tomes or referred to during sacrificial ceremonies. After all, they can't actually affect the real world directly and go through several layers of proxies to execute their wills. Particularly well-established worm cults and black spiral dancers are likely to be aware of them, referring to them reverently in all manners of occult rituals. But for your players, they should be unknowable, terrifying forces to be feared more than understood. If you wish to go this route, I highly recommend getting your hands on the book Chronicles of the Black Labyrinth. Chapter 6, which starts on page 67, is a treasure trove of inspiration. It details how human cultists can dance the black spiral, what exactly can be found in each layer of the spiral, and details proper worship and sacrifice for each Triatic Wyrms, Elemental Wyrms, and Urge Worms. It's a pretty dark book though, so be prepared. Still, if you wish, you can use them directly. However, understand this. When the Triatic Wyrms get personally involved, things happen on a whole other scale. Such truly apocalyptic events are better told as the central theme of an entire chronicle, where the players must fight tooth and nail to prevent one of them from achieving their goals. The key thing to know is that spirits of this level cannot physically manifest. I mean, they're stuck in the web, remember? Calling them to Earth requires epically complex occult mojo to happen first, giving plenty of time for your players to get involved. Should they manage to get a foot in the door, stopping them from crossing over requires just as much epically complex occult mojo. To put things into perspective, the Eater of Souls almost successfully manifested on Earth once. To prevent this, an entire tribe of werewolves sacrificed themselves and their patron in a ritual. The permanence of this sacrifice prevents the Eater of Souls from trying again. Remember the Croatan middle brother? Well, that's why they aren't around anymore, and their patron is nowhere to be seen either. Utterly calcified in the gauntlet, no one knows where. If you want to involve the Triatic Wyrms, the stakes should be that high. The world of the Garou should never be the same once the dust settles. As for the Elemental Wyrms, honestly, as far as evil entities go, they aren't as relevant and wouldn't really have a reason to feature in the story. First, they're stuck in the Black Labyrinth 2, and second, they're elementals. They have no desire or need to be involved with anything. Sure, mention their names and dark rituals, and make the cultists face whichever direction is appropriate to the sacrifice they're doing, yes. But in play or as adversaries, it's usually best to just involve their endless supply of elemental banes infesting everywhere their physical counterparts exist. If you feel the need to crank up the epic, they do have one layer of proxies, males and incarnations. Most likely you'll stick to low-level elemental banes. And of course, if you want to go there, Pentex's many subsidiaries are happy to lend a hand with an oil spill here, a drop barrel of nuclear waste there. It's probably the best approach, let's be honest. On their own, Banes are a tad simple as far as story goes. They're kinda just there, waiting to be pummeled to oblivion as a stepping stone to cleansing the area. It makes a fine introduction to Werewolf, but it gets tired fast. But paired with a Pentex subsidiary, things can get a lot more interesting. It's relatively easy to cleanse a random location, but if there's an ongoing end-drawn operation on site, suddenly the barrier to entry becomes a lot higher, and werewolves might find themselves having to fight with more than tooth and claw. Maybe even local politics? Building influence? Finding allies? Yeah, this is where a werewolf starts to sound a bit like vampire, and that's okay. It's not as much of a central aspect, but werewolves absolutely can and do fight with tools other than those they were born with. This is where tribes like Glasswalkers, Bone Gnawers, Shadow Lords, and Silverfangs get to shine in different ways. This is where tribes who might otherwise despise each other are forced to work together. Another appropriate approach could be to mix in some Weaver-related shenanigans. You may have noticed that a lot of essences touch things that are man-made, like drugs, radioactivity, sewage, and so on. And you may be tempted to think that man-made automatically equals Weaver, and you would not be wrong. Humans are the chosen ones of the Weaver. We are its favorite tool to spread her influence. Wherever we explore, we dissect, we study, we categorize, we archive. The more we understand, the more we strengthen the very definition she has given to all things. In other words, we spread and strengthen the pattern web. And who is trapped in those webs again? That's right, the worm. It's not a coincidence that the line between Weaver and Wyrm gets blurry sometimes. It's not a coincidence that the worm's greatest ally is a megacorp. It's not a coincidence that today's world is built on soul-crushing work. That's not the Weaver's influence. It's the worm's. What the Weaver builds, the worm corrupts. As far as stories go, it's not a stretch to think any Weaver elementals, which are glass, metal, plastic, electricity, or atomic, could be corrupted by worm ones. Or what if an abandoned nuclear factory is left to decay and rot, slowly strengthening the worm's hold? Maybe a powerful atomic elemental crucial to Loka's Glasswalkers must be rescued before it turns into an unstoppable firmling elemental. That's the Balefire one. Next episode, we'll get familiar with the last of the worm's many incarnations, the Urge Worms.